our initial description on paper of how we wanted to use Helsinki with the 3 musicians, we didn't want to see their faces, we didn't want to see them, we wanted to use the instruments as a landscape, and we wanted a camera incredibly close up shot of the cantalar, which is a stringed instrument, so that we would see fingers plucking it and we would see strings vibrating. And that is exactly what we wanted. In a massively complex show like that, the minute you learn you can't do that, you have to say, right, we've got different alternatives. We brought them in, we took them out, they sang for another 3 or 4 minutes afterwards, and the singing was extraordinarily powerful and moving. But we felt we had to use the technology, even though it wasn't our first artistic choice, how we used it. So my middle name in those situations has to be compromised. Artistically you try not to, but within that setting we were being gifted a massive amount of time, resources and space and people in kind for that project. So next phase we can move it on, hopefully.
Overall this has been a really great technical conversation, and the show was technically perfect. You didn't notice the technology, which is superb. Right. But that's actually a failure, I think. Yeah, in the way that
it's an inadequacy in the technology
on
as
using
well.
the technology rather than creating something which gave the audience more. There were points, as you say, the infinite bridge scene, which really connected visually with the audience. You felt part of the show.
It also had half of its elements missing due to a technological failure.
Yeah, the haze.
Right, yeah, it was a bit of a puffy smoke machine.
No, the smoke machine disappeared 10, 20 seconds into the cue. Right. It's a 6.5 minute scene. When she walks forward during it, it's like she's walking in the most ridiculous slow motion walk ever, because it's like she's walking on clouds. And in both dress rehearsals, it was a deeply moving haze and light experience. In the final performance last night, smoke machine decided not to work. We had 10 seconds, 20 seconds of smoke, and that was it. So we had a very different experience that scene last night. Nature of live theatre.
Well, it still worked.
It worked. Everything we chose, we always had a backup. So the backup was, if the haze machine doesn't work, does the lighting effect work? Yes, it does. So if that lighting effect hadn't worked, we would have lit the scene in a different way to make the scene happen. We were never going to stop the show because technology had failed in some way.
You're going to perform it again?
Yeah, I think
we're working on it. Yeah,
yeah, we're working.
Definitely.
It'd be nice to see it now.
Yeah,
yeah. Maybe we see some stills.
Yeah, I have some stuff. So, well, we have the recordings from the rehearsal, but we don't have time yet. I couldn't have time to transfer it.
But just like, you know, because I haven't been there, so it would be nice, because, you know, I was listening about...
also, I forgot to say, thank you for inviting me as well.
It would be nice to have at least a little bit of visual, yeah? Sorry.
You want visuals?
Sorry, I need it literally, you know? I need it literally.
Just to carry on the answer to that question while they're setting up the technology, if you were doing that show in a commercial setting, you would do a minimum of 10 days technical rehearsal. So we had 6 hours technical rehearsal on Sunday. Right? So the achievement of delivering the technology and the whole show in 6 hours is quite phenomenal. The second thing is that you'd then have 8 to 10 previews. And during those previews, you'd refine the dramaturgy, you'd define all elements of the show, you'd cut things, you'd shape things differently, you'd have invited audiences in, you'd have feedback sessions, that kind of thing. So none of that model exists in this context. However, for our next setting, we would be working towards that.
Big theatre shows you get anything like that these days.
No.
You get one day preview these days.
No. There's in the planning of it, you'd need much longer period of running if you're doing that commercially.
For sure.
So because the show was yesterday, I couldn't transfer and edit anything, obviously. So I think the best way to show you the visual is to show you the actual contents and maybe not the video of the stage, because it's also in raw format, so I can't read it. So some of the things I can start with. So I start with so this is one of the works from Hanor. So what the story, one of the elements of the story is Talia, the main character, being living in a mundane world, urban, stressful environment, and meeting Rivera, a street artist, who inspired her and bring some creativity and beauty in her life, so she can refine this inner strength. So the buildings are recursive in the show, and obviously we use it as a representation of the city landscapes. And we also use it as a material to create the art. So Rivera is kind of a highly powered artist who can blow buildings and create art with them. So this is one of the works that Hanor created in response to this idea. So that's obviously very slow. The choreography is developing with the animation. So there is a link also with the movements of the performers in Barcelona. So he's using a morphing technique in this. I'm not really motion graphics designer, so I can't tell you precisely how he's doing it, but I know he spent a lot of time, a lot of work. And he had to do it a couple of times because he wasn't happy with the result and so on. But basically he has his mesh and then he's just messing around with it and doing this morphing technique so it all looks smooth and fluent.
And of course you've got a full orchestra playing underneath this as well, which is adding layers of drama to it and meaning.
And it's on the mesh screens, you've got dancers performing, actors performing.
And you've got actors working on another layer behind it.
Front row. Not the back, the front.
And you've got dancers in Barcelona being projected into it, dancing live in Barcelona.
Okay.
So as if their movements are helping him, inspire him in a way. We took the two dancers in Barcelona as if they were his muses that he remembered meeting when he was traveling. And the animation in their dance, their physicality, brought alive his own imagination and allowed him to deconstruct the city in this way in front of our eyes.
Can I ask, what sections of the show did you think were most successful and which were failures for you?
I think the part with your particles was really efficient. The way he worked was to create a DNA for each particle, so they listen to one frequency, and depending on which frequency is used, they can pass this information on the new generations of the particles. So, and that created a very interesting behavior, and that worked very well with the action and the dancers, I think. Another part was actually Barcelona, I thought worked very well.
Sorry, what part?
This part with the dancers from Barcelona on top of the layers on the buildings. I thought that worked well because in the dance rehearsal we talk about the inspiration of Gaudi, which you can't obviously see it here because we didn't literally reproduce Gaudi's visual aesthetic, but we use it as a common word, common vocabulary, common inspiration for the dancers and for Hanor. So they created a dance material in relation to that conversations. And so I think that was one of the elements why this scene worked very well as well. And also because in that part we have an immersive kind of performance where the dancers, some of the dancers in London are actually in the auditorium. So that gives also the audience the opportunity to kind of look in different directions and be immersed. Another thing which was very well was the end of Helsinki, when you have Helsinki playing, and then suddenly you realize that Talia is just standing and looking at the musicians, the gods of music, and suddenly you realize that there is dancers walking towards her, behind her. And there's this line of light that we bring it, that we can't see it until the dancers eventually arrive in the line. And that's a very simple effect that people do with goes, but dramatically that was really intense. And this is also interesting because then you use traditional theater techniques with new techniques. So that, for me, that was an achievement really this scene. Let's show you some of the contents.
Now, ask the choreographer, was there any choreology between Barcelona and London dancers?
Yeah, we were set around the theatre, sort of in a chorus type idea that we would just be reverberating what was happening on there. We were just adding to the intention on stage. We weren't creating any story, we had no character or anything like that, but there were a lot of links. We had this system of numbered cues that Barcelona worked on with the choreographer, supposing through Polycom, is separate to us, the dancers. Bear in mind, I'm not the choreographer. So they worked together, came up with certain cues, and they were numbered. And then us, the dancers sat around the theatre, we used those different cues in a pattern